Thank you. So I'm really excited to be here this morning, and so let me say this. I know two things. I know that silence is agreement, and you cannot change what you tolerate. And so I speak to you first as a Black woman, as a mother of 4 sons, and as a police sergeant last. And so I started this journey in 2013 on the heels of the Christopher Dorner incident in Los Angeles, and I don't know if you know that. I'll tell you very briefly. He was a Black man who was fired from the LAPD because he thought the LAPD had done him filthy. And I don't condone what he did. I don't condone violence, but he ultimately wound up killing 4 people that he felt had something to do with his termination. And while they were hunting for Christopher Dorner, myself and other Blacks on LAPD, we were really kind of rooting for him because we knew that everything he was complaining about having suffered at the hands of LAPD to be true. And I knew that they were going to kill him, and I knew that his story would be lost in that. And so I decided to write an autobiography about what I had gone through on the LAPD during my 20 years between 1980 and 2000. Because everything that Christopher Dorner had gone through, I had gone through. But I hadn't killed anybody, and I'm honorably retired, and so they could not besmirch me and say that I was a disgruntled employee, and therefore you should not believe anything that I say. So I did that, and then fast forward in 2014, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, in Los Angeles, we had Ezell Ford, who was shot and killed by LAPD officers, and I watched family members speak to police chiefs, or try to speak to what I call police code talk, double talk, and the families didn't really have the words to say about why they were hurting and why was their loved one killed, because the police chief always says in front of a bank of cameras that there was something that happened 10, 15 seconds before the camera that would explain that thing that's unexplainable. And so I realized that based on my 20 years of experience, which I spent all in uniform as a police officer and as a patrol supervisor, that I could speak credibly to why officers should not be using deadly force as a first resort, the way we see it happening, but rather as a last resort, as the way we're taught. And so I just wanted to kind of stand in the gap for those family members and talk in a real and honest way about the kinds of things that we know are occurring. And so I'm just preaching to the choir because I'm only validating and corroborating the things that you guys go through day in and day out. And I just say that it's true, it happens. And I do it in a way that's undeniable and irrefutable. So I wanted to just have people understand about Christopher Dorner, how he got there, why he did what he did, and explain the police culture. I want people to understand that the problems that I talk about are unique to LAPD, but they're not unique to law enforcement, because I think LAPD acts and moves like any other police department. And so I believe that the problems that we're seeing are cultural, they're systemic, and they're top-down. And when I say top-down, I mean from the police chief, because understand every police chief was once a police officer. And it's my belief that police chiefs have an obligation to that entity, to that organism, to that department. And so when we see things like Walter Scott, who was shot 8 times in the back by Michael Schlager, and have them try to explain for a little while why that was okay and justified, or Sam DeBose, who was shot and killed because he didn't have a front plate on his car, or Sandra Bland, who I don't believe for a minute committed suicide. You know, what I do know is that police officers have a symbiotic relationship with the jailers. I worked with jailers day in and day out, and I know that I would take in unruly arrestees, and you know, I had some jailers give me that knowing nod when somebody was giving me a lot of mouth, and I would pass them on. And so I believe that exactly that's what happened with Sandra Bland. I don't think she was quiet when she got into jail, because she doesn't seem like that kind of girl. And I think that probably at some point they dealt with her, much like they did Freddie Gray in the back of that van. When the officers said in their police report they dealt with him, that means they put hands on him. And so I just speak real honest and truthfully about the kinds of things that police officers do. And I do this because I want to make a difference. And so we can't fix what we don't admit is broken. And so unless and until police chiefs who understand serve at the pleasure most times of a mayor, unless and until they're ready to admit that there's a problem, then there's nothing to fix. And so what do? Part of what we do is, and I'm excited to be here with young people who have an interest in law enforcement, is you get on those police departments. I talk to activists in LA and they go crazy when I say it, but change is going to come from within. And so I know this to be true because as a black woman on the LAPD, I had an opportunity when I worked with white officers who were treating people that looked like me in a way that I thought was inappropriate to say, we don't do that. We don't set people on the curb. If you're afraid of them, if you're fearful of them, then let's put them in handcuffs like we're taught, and let's put them in the back of our police car for their safety and ours, and then we'll get through that process. And so I just think that part of the other problem is that there's no accountability, and I hear this from family members because I know Sandra Bland's sister Sharon. She and I were panel mates on a television show, and I've come to know the family of Oscar Grant and Mike Brown and in Los Angeles, Isa Ford. And what those family members want is they want accountability. They don't want a community or a police department to throw buckets of money at them every time they kill someone. It almost feels as if there's this system in place where they do this thing that they do, and then they just throw buckets of money at the family, and they never really substantively change the policies and the procedures. And so part of that is going to be training, part of it is going to be recruitment, and that's where you young people come in, get on those police departments. Part of it is going to be holding officers accountable, and it's going to take legislation, and if you guys are doing big things here in Texas, maybe you guys can start the way to hold officers financially responsible for fatalities or people who are injured at the hands of an errant officer. When an officer says that he's in fear for his safety and does something that is inappropriate or violates policy, that officer should be held responsible. If you don't deter that bad behavior by holding them responsible, then what have they learned? We've seen time and time again, not much. Betty Shelby, she shot and killed Terrence Crutcher, and 2 weeks later she was in another police department. They gave her the gift of resignation. They allowed her to resign. Rather than fire her, they allowed her to resign so she could then go to another police department and continue on. And I pray that she doesn't, but she may very well see another black man who scares her more than anything ever in her life and shoot him because we didn't do anything, or that department didn't do anything to defer that bad behavior. Michael Schlager, before he shot and killed Walter Scott, that was the third time that he had used a taser inappropriately on someone. So imagine if that police agency had handled him the first time when he used a taser. Perhaps Mr. Scott would be alive today. And so when these things make national news, I'm of the opinion that it's never the first time that an officer misbehaved. Officers don't start off killing people. They start off talking to you crazy on the side of the road. They start off being kind of aggressive with you. They start off putting you in jail on a Friday night for something that they know is BS, because we understand that we have great authority and autonomy is given to us. And if I arrest you on a Friday night for something that I know the DA is going to reject on Monday, okay. But guess what? I just took 72 hours out of your life that you can never get back. I've inconvenienced you. I paid your car. You may have to get an attorney to fight this charge if it becomes a charge down the road. And so these are the kinds of games that police officers play. And I know this to be true because I've seen it done. And so these are the things that I speak about in an effort to maybe shame some police chiefs into doing the right thing, to make you all aware that it exists, even though you know it exists because you're a victim of it a lot of times, and to talk in a real and honest way so that maybe we can do something different. And then the other part is officers need to be reevaluated psychologically, because I believe that everybody who wants to be a police shouldn't be. And I know that when I joined LAPD, I had a psychological when I first joined and never again. And so I know officers are exposed to things that can twist you. You can be exposed to a partner who's not acting appropriately and who will get you to do some things because your career is in their hands and you want to survive that probationary period or whatever it is that you need to do to get vested. And so you'll look the other way, you'll go along to get along. And so I think it's important for police chiefs to admit it. If you find someone who's on your department that really isn't suited for that, they don't have the skill set, then help them over to Pizza Hut or wherever they need to be. I mean, there's no dishonor in that. If you see someone whose head is not on right because of something that they've been exposed to, because of the things that we see day in and day out, or because of a partner, and you crack that head open and stuff is not working right, try to fix it if you can, and if you can't, then get them off that department and get them to another position. It just makes sense to me. And then the other thing is training. And I know every department is different, and there's a lot of things that are gonna have to take place in order to fix this system. There's not one thing that will fix it. And so it's important to understand what all of those pieces are and the roles that you play in those pieces. The last thing that I'll leave with you young people is that I want you to, when you're interacting with police officers. I want to help you survive that encounter. So what I want you to do is I want you to comply and complain. I want you to live through that experience. It's so important, and I have 4 sons, and I have this conversation with them all the time, because listen, we know what happens when you don't. We know what happens when you don't turn around and put your hands behind your back like Eric Garner, because he said, "Officer, I'm tired. I'm not doing anything." We know what happens when Sam DeBose was a little concerned about being stopped by an officer because he didn't have a front plate, or Philando Castile did the right thing and said, "Officer, I have a concealed carry." And when that officer looked in the back seat of that car and saw that 4-year-old baby and couldn't relate to that child and think that that could be my daughter or that could be my little sister, and pump 4 or 5 rounds into that car, we do the best that we can to try to stay safe. But I promise you, if you don't comply, bad things will happen. And so I just want to make sure that you understand there's nothing wrong with being quiet. It doesn't make you a punk. It doesn't make you less than. But police officers are given great deference, and we know this to be true because we see what happens on those rare occasions when they make it to court. Jurors don't find them guilty. They always side with what the officer said. And so there's so many ways and reasons in which a police officer can justify that thing that they do. And because we have the authority, and because people by and large want to believe what we say, is very difficult. Even with audio, even with video recordings that we see, as in the case of Alton Sterling, where the officer stood over him and said, "MF, if you don't quit moving, I will blow your effing head off." And he did just that. And they still thought that the shooting was justified. So you do the best that you can. You want to stay alive, comply and complain. You need to create a pattern of bad behavior on the part of the officer, so that when that thing happens, because it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And when that thing happens, there's a record, and no one can say, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know that this officer had this issue. I didn't know that this officer was aggressive in the field," because no one has ever complained. And that's something that our community is for whatever reason, reluctant to do, because we think nothing is going to happen. And that may very well be true. Nothing may happen for you. But you're creating a pattern of practice, and you're showing that sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. And so while you may not benefit in the short term, you may certainly help someone in the long term. And it's very important to create that and show that this officer has an issue, has a problem relating to people, doesn't respect the community in which they serve, because that's how it starts. It starts off with officers not speaking to you appropriately. And there was a survey that was done by a professor in Oakland, Dr. Jennifer Eberhard, and she talks about the difference in which officers speak to minorities versus whites during traffic stops. And so there's information, there's statistics out there like what we were hearing about today that speak to those things. I'm not really a statistics person. I just tell you what I know. I just tell you what I saw. And then let the chips fall where they may. And so I'm just really excited to be here. I'm looking forward to answering your questions. I'm looking forward to being very candid and honest with you about the kinds of things that I think will make a difference. And I appreciate your time.